Welcome to our webinar today, Incorporating Montessori Programs in State Quality Improvement Systems. I'm Debbie Mathias from the BUILD Initiative and the Director of the Early Childhood Quality Improvement Systems Network. BUILD works with community, state, and national partners to develop early childhood systems that are equitable and excellent for all marginalized children, their families, and communities. BUILD partners with state early childhood leaders to catalyze change and implement a whole child, whole system vision. Gosh, we have colleagues from over 48 states and territories registered for this session today. We had such a strong reception in terms of folks signing up and being interested in the content of this session. When you registered, we asked you what you hope to learn or hear about in the sessions and got a lot of terrific responses that we've really considered informing some of the content in our work. Some examples were ways to reflect the quality of Montessori-based programs participating in the QIS and how other states are incorporating non-traditional educational models in QRIS systems. How do we create different pathways to quality to be more flexible for different programs and to meet the needs of families? Then we had some folks who were delving deep into specifics, including how states modify the use of observational assessments in Montessori programs and how Montessori curriculum is viewed in terms of a state-approved curricula. Well, we'll get to all of that today. You know, BUILD has a long history of considering a big tent for the quality improvement work. And we've released a set of papers discussing specific program participation by types of programs and settings of programs, such as Head Start, pre-K, infant and toddler specifics, and home-based childcare. I'll throw the link in the chat box in just a minute so that you can find those papers if you're interested in those specific types and settings. States are at a point in time where creating policies and opportunities for more flexible participation and options within the quality improvement work. Next slide, please. We're interested in your questions, ideas, and thoughts throughout the session, so please enter into the chat box as something strikes you. If you have a resource or strategy to contribute from your work, please also share. If you have a question, use the Q&A tab. This helps us locate questions quickly during the session and be able to attend to them later in the session. So we're going to begin with our introduction, which we've already started. What is Montessori? We're going to have a terrific panel discussion, a response to your ideas and questions you've posed, and then a wrap-up. We're excited to hear from the Montessori Public Policy Initiative and a group of terrific state leaders incorporating their successes and challenges. Deeper panel bios will be included with the webinar posting, as each of our panelists brings many years of experience and deep thinking to our conversation today. I'd like to begin by introducing our panel members from the Montessori Public Policy Initiative. Wendy Shank-Evans is the Executive Director. Wendy works to expand access to Montessori education by advocating with state and federal policymakers, developing resources and strategies to support Montessori advocates, and collaborating with leaders across the Montessori and early childhood community. Denise Monnier is an advocacy director at the Montessori Public Policy Initiative. She was a Montessori student, parent, and school leader, which gives her just such a great deep perspective. Her work with MPPI is centered around supporting state advocacy groups and equipping them with tools and training they need to be effective advocates for children. Now I'd like to turn the session over to Wendy to give us some basics about Montessori and build up the base for our continued discussion throughout the session.
Debbie,
Wendy?
thanks so much.
Always.
Thanks so much for hosting this webinar and having us. And thanks to all of you for joining today. Many of you here today are guiding early childhood programs through continuous quality improvement in your state. And at the same time, your state systems are undergoing their own form of quality improvement through analysis and revision of your QIS and other early childhood systems with an eye to better serving children and families. We really applaud the fact that so many states are prioritizing equity and access in early childhood education and working towards having a really robust mixed delivery system that incorporates a range of early childhood settings. Building early childhood systems that support a variety of program models and pedagogical approaches really helps ensure that families are able to choose the quality program that best meets their and their children's needs. One important facet of this work is ensuring that QIS rubrics factor in that some markers of quality will vary by setting. Family child care, Indigenous early childhood programs, and pedagogical models such as Montessori and Waldorf are some examples of settings that have unique needs, and in some domains, they'll have different markers of quality. So why is this so important? Well, to incentivize programs to raise their quality, many state child care subsidy programs offer tiered reimbursement based on a program's quality level. Other states require programs to achieve a certain level in their QIS in order to be a provider in various public funding streams, including subsidy and universal pre-K programs. So it's really important to ensure that quality in different settings can be adequately recognized and captured. If programs are disincentivized to participate in QIS because markers of quality don't align well, then that ultimately reduces options for families. We've seen a trend in states, as Debbie mentioned, that really one size doesn't fit all when it comes to program quality measures. So to accomplish goals related to equity and access, systems and policies are evolving to allow for a certain degree of breadth. And today we'll talk with some states that have made revisions to better include Montessori programs in their QIS. We hope ultimately that this can serve as an example for how to think more broadly about quality to ensure it can be appropriately recognized in a variety of contexts. Before we dig into the specific areas where quality improvement systems have worked with the Montessori community, I want to just give a broad overview of the approach for those who are less familiar with it. Montessori is a holistic, child-centered, developmentally based approach to education that's rooted in neuroscience. Like the rest of the early childhood community, we want children to thrive in their early childhood settings and beyond. So Montessori classrooms cultivate confidence, curiosity, academic skills, independence, social emotional capability, critical thinking, and more. Montessori instruction is intentionally highly personalized, so it's well positioned to be culturally responsive and to support students with learning differences. Children in Montessori classrooms also develop strong executive function skills, which we know are such key tools for learning. The process by which the Montessori approach nurtures the outcomes we want for children differs from what you might see in other settings, which is where we hit some of the challenges that we do with quality improvement systems. By design, Montessori classrooms incorporate several core elements that all work in concert with each other to optimize each child's cognitive, social, emotional, and physical development. These components are interdependent and they are embedded in program accreditation standards because they're markers of a quality Montessori program. I've bulleted these components out on the slide, and we explain them further in a document that we'll link to in the chat. I also want to note that longitudinal research has demonstrated that students in public Montessori schools are more likely to have met or exceeded state standards and demonstrated greater growth in several subject areas when compared to students with similar demographics in conventional public schools. And another longitudinal research study has shown the impact of high-quality Montessori programs in reducing the income opportunity gap across the preschool years. The paper explains the challenges that Montessori programs encounter in quality improvement rubrics, including recognition of Montessori teacher preparation in state workforce registries, elements of environmental assessments, the need to be on approved curriculum lists, and licensing regulations that can restrict elements that are markers of a high-quality Montessori program. So why are we doing this work? MPPI's work is rooted in a vision that we can help realize an early childhood landscape that provides equitable access to the highest quality early care and education programs, including Montessori settings. And we'll put a link to our website in chat so you can learn more about us and our work there. Because we know that Montessori is impactful and effective, we want more children to have access to this approach, which involves ensuring that quality in Montessori settings can be adequately recognized. Montessori programs do not want to veer away from what is best practice in their setting to fit a different definition of quality. Yet if they opt out of QIS, it reduces opportunities for families and children. We are also very well aware that you and other policymakers in your state are stretched thin. So our hope is that through this paper, today's webinar, and MPPI's supports, we can help you give families access to even more high-quality programs by creating Montessori inclusive QIS rubrics, as several of our panelists have helped do. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Denise and our panelists.
Thank you, Wendy, and good afternoon, everyone. I have to say that I'm excited, thrilled to be here today with our three panelists who I have worked with in one way or another, along with the state advocates from each of their states. And I'm so happy to have them share the conversations that they have had with their Montessori communities and the advancements in terms of recognizing quality in Montessori that they have come up with through those relationships and collaborations. So Wendy outlined a little bit about Montessori in general, and also why it's important for all families to be able to access quality Montessori programs. I'm going to go right ahead and introduce our panelists. We have three panelists today. First off, I'm going to introduce Donna Wade, who is the Senior Program Director overseeing Michigan's Early Childhood Investment Corporation's Early Care and Learning Programs. Welcome, Donna. And then next we have Tom Lehman, Quality Rating and Improvement System Policy Director in the Illinois Governor's Office of Early Childhood Development. And then our third panelist is Rachel Brown-Kendall, Quality Recognition and Improvement System Administrator for the Washington State Department of Children, Youth, and Families. And I'll say what I said to them. All of your titles have a lot of words that are hard for me to pronounce clearly, but I'm really grateful to all of you for being here today and sharing about your work. And I want to sort of start off with asking each of you the same question that will sort of share a little bit about the perspective you use in your work. This question came up from the conversations we had preparing for this webinar. And every time we left a conversation, my colleagues and I were so excited about everything you said, we decided to just go ahead and ask you about it on the webinar. So this is a three-part question. And what I'd like is to hear each of you share how your state's approach to QIS has been evolving, how you see those revisions impacting both programs and families, and how this shift opened the door for the conversations you've had with the Montessori advocates in your state. And I'd like to start off with you, Donna, if that's okay.
Thanks, Denise. So in Michigan, we're really excited about the revisions to our QRS system. Our new Great Start to Quality system launches next week. And we're really confident that the changes will be more supportive of providers and families by focusing on continuous quality and excellence in childcare. We'll be meeting programs where they are on the quality continuum and honoring their different program types and philosophies. This will allow families to have opportunities to find high quality care that fits what's important to them. And that's how I met with you and Wendy previously, and we've discussed, how all of this fits into the Montessori program and the changes, and how the changes are definitely going to help incorporate more Montessori programs into our quality improvement system.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Donna. I do want to reiterate that the thing that I feel like has been so amazing working with you in Michigan is the openness to wanting to find a way to support every program and how they can improve in terms of being who they want to be, the best program that they want to be. So thank you for that. And then my next question, or the same question actually, is for Tom Lehman from Illinois. You don't need me to read it again, do you?
No, I think in fact, if I don't answer it exactly, you will tell me. Denise, I have to say that I didn't realize you were a Montessori student, a Montessori child. And so I can attest that you have a lot of those characteristics that Wendy was talking about, including persistence. That was an important one. So anyway, I'd like to start talking about how we at Illinois, and I'm in the governor's office, I'm policy director for our quality recognition and improvement system, how we got involved in this conversation, if that works for you. So, and as you know, Denise, we established a committee in 2018 to look at our QRIS experience to that point, look at the results, and see if we needed to propose changes. We were dissatisfied, and what it looked like, that programs were not moving up the ladder. They weren't improving. There were good programs who came in good and they stayed good for the most part, and not, others who didn't participate much and they continued to not participate much. And so we had an early learning council committee that was established to look at that and make recommendations. So one of the basic problems we identified was that programs without a culture of continuous improvement were not increasing their quality. Some programs were not taking ownership of quality and not using continuous improvement. You can't look at it once a year. You have to continually have staff teams looking at quality. So we wanted to move our system in that direction. There are standards, there are supports, but how could we move to help programs build a culture of improvement and establish continuous improvement processes? So assessment scores became part of that in the conversation. And we have been using them as cut scores for what level of recognition that centers and homes are at. And we thought, well, we'd really like to change the emphasis and maybe look at them as baseline data for those team processes of improving, using them to plan and test some improvements. So, and thank you to the Montessori leaders in our state who pointed out that the early ERS assessments and some others were not fully appropriate for that purpose or for any purpose in Montessori. And so we're fortunate to have a group of very high quality Montessori programs. And as I said, Denise and MPTI to make sure we don't forget. And so they said there are some obstacles, particularly in ERS, the ERS instruments. And so we established a work group, and this was a work group of the committee. And we met with our state's director of assessments, who is very knowledgeable. And we talked for a few meetings, and we agreed on some changes. So Denise, should I say what we agreed on?
No, let's wait for the next question. But that was really fantastic, and thank you, Tom. And all to be as open as possible. I am in Illinois, and so that's why Tom knows that I'm persistent, because I'm constantly emailing him and calling him and texting him and asking him, first of all, to explain policies, and second of all, to consider looking at them in terms of Montessori schools. And we certainly appreciate that constant dialogue. But then I'd like to ask you, Rachel, to answer that same question, and then we'll move on to the next set. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Denise. Boy, I tell you, it is a packed question, and something I'll share is that I have been a part of our QRIS since the beginning, but serving in different roles. And so our QRIS Early Achievers started in 2012. I think that's right. Yes, it seems like it was so long ago. And at that point in time, I was in a local area, and I was in charge of the local implementation. And then I worked with our state partner, Child Care of Washington, on some supports for participants. And then almost 8 years ago now, I moved over to the state to support the implementation of QRS across the state. And throughout that time, I think the acknowledgement of the different provider types that existed in our state was something that was really important, and for them to feel seen within that lens. And I can remember just through this conversation, hearing Donna and Tom talk about this, it made me flash back to when I was that regional coordinator working in my county and interfacing with Montessori providers who really felt like the system was not designed to showcase the work that was happening, the quality that was happening within the interactions with their teachers and the children, and the interactions of the rich environment, et cetera. And I think that plays into a big piece that we have really focused on from the state perspective as we have revised our QRIS is intent versus impact. Like, we all come to this work with the intent that we want to highlight and showcase the quality that folks are doing. But sometimes the impact of the way we go about doing that has negative consequences. And I think that that's what we have heard over the past, 10 years of implementing early achievers, is providers coming to us and saying, look, it just feels like you're asking for these things and you're saying you want to showcase our quality, but we feel like you're dinging us and you're showing us what we're not doing. Or it feels like you're really trying to come across with cookie cutter programs, like everybody has the same expectations, and this doesn't feel good to us. And that didn't align with what our values were as a state, nor did that really align with the values about equity and recognizing that quality has many different flavors and views, and there are many right ways to do things, and that family choice is such an important part of the quality continuum, right? And so I really think that has been kind of a guiding principle for us as we've engaged in our quality improvement work. And so COVID-19 was horrible, right? Like, the pandemic was catastrophic and traumatic for families and organizations and individuals across the globe. Like, I want to acknowledge that. It also created a really unique space for our state to do things differently and to explore in ways that we had not had the freedom to do before. And so I am so grateful for the pandemic in that way, because it forced us to engage with individuals in different ways. It forced us to look at what people were saying and really hear them, and not just be like, oh, well, this is the tool we're using and this is what we're committed to, but to really stop and say, is there another way? Is there another way we could do this? And so it has been, I think, a pretty fantastic journey. And we were very intentional. I mean, from the time I started working at the state almost 8 years ago, at that point in time, my supervisor was very much involved with the Pacific Northwest Montessori Association, had regular meetings, there were regular conversations that were happening where that group of providers was coming and talking to the state and saying, this is what we're doing. This is what we're about. Let's work together, and really trying to develop conversations and that understanding. And so as we revised over the years, it was always important for us to make sure that we were plugging into those different provider groups. And the Pacific Northwest Montessori Association is one of those groups, Family Child Care Union, another group, but really being mindful of who are the different providers in our state and how are they helping to shape the system that we're going to ask them to participate in. So that has been really key for our work. So I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. And just to stress a couple of things that you said, Rachel, the idea of those relationships. I know Pacific Northwest Montessori Association is very active in Wisconsin, and obviously we are here in Illinois as well, and we have 40 plus other states with organizations like that. But I think that, and I'm sorry, I'm plugging the Build organization in this because it's part of my story, but one of the ways that I really got to get a good sense about what the early childhood sort of governance community is like in my state was by attending our state meetings back at the Build live sessions when they were, in person, and we could all gather in a room, sometimes even with a glass of wine, and really talk about what was going on in general, with everyone sharing their perspective. But I think that relationship building and that sense of partnership is something that we feel with all three of your states and many other ones who aren't represented on this call, but it's so valuable for us in terms of moving our Montessori initiatives forward, but also for children and families in every aspect of this kind of work. So thank you all of you for those insightful answers to question number 1 or 1, 2, and 3, depending on how you look at it. But I want to delve into some of the points that folks will find in the paper. And just a quick reminder, any questions that you have for the group, because I see how many chats there are, if you can make sure you put them in the Q&A section so we can try to address them, or as many of them as we can before we close. So my first specific question is for Donna Wade. And I'll just say a couple more things about Donna, even though you can read about her in the advertisements. Donna brings more than 25 years of experience in the early care and education field, specializing in the advancing the quality of care for young children. Previously, she just served as the Director of Quality Services for a nonprofit organization supporting the early care and learning field in Alaska. And a lot of times you get to see a really beautiful panoramic view behind her on Zoom, which is always nice for those of us who've never been there. So Donna, there were some recent conversations about the placement of Montessori credentials on the Michigan Workforce Registry, MI Registry, and those resulted in the placement being moved. I'd love it if you could share what the new placement is and those conversations that led to that decision.
Sure, Denise. Yeah, so like Tom was saying, our local Montessori leaders reached out to us and to discuss the placement of the Montessori credential on our workforce registry, which is called My Registry. So originally, Michigan recognized Montessori teaching credential at a professional level 1, which is equivalent to a CDA. And so through conversations that we've had with Montessori leaders and people from MPII as well about the placement, we spoke, we had good conversations, we had back and forth emails. They told us about the rich content in their curriculum for teachers and provided us with some resources to review. And so we had a lot of, like I said, back and forth conversations and emails. And afterward, we were able to change the placement. So currently, teachers with a Montessori credential and associate's degree are at a professional level 2. And if they have a bachelor's degree with the Montessori credential, they're at a professional level 3, which is higher. And it seemed to satisfy what Montessori, where they thought they should be placed, and we were in agreement. So this helps with teachers too, because it qualified these teachers. They were then qualified to teach in the Michigan State funded pre-K programs, so our GSRPs, which is Great Start Readiness Programs.
Thank you, Donna. And I just want to clarify that that the level 2 and the level 3, I think, are the equivalent of someone having an associate's degree in early childhood education or a bachelor's degree in early childhood education.
Exactly.
Correct?
And so also that gives parents more choice. So we talk about how important this is to parents as well. So if parents qualify for state funded pre-K and Montessori is important to them, then it allows them to have more choice and more options, and they can put their children in a state funded pre-K program that's a Montessori program.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that really speaks to some of the things that Wendy was highlighting about why it is that we do that work, and we certainly do appreciate the partnership that you provide for us in Michigan. Thank you very much. My next question is for you, Tom, and I'm going to share a couple more things about Tom as well. Tom began his career in childcare working in Head Start and school-aged care programs, and he served as a director for a nonprofit childcare center for 21 years. Tom's role as vice president for program development at Illinois Action for Children was where he developed a state preschool for all childcare collaboration programs, a large Head Start program, and Early Reading First and Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant projects. Tom, you mentioned the Early Learning Council Committee on Accelerate and the subcommittee of that that I joined you on with a couple other Montessori leaders. There were some really extensive conversations about the Montessori program challenges on just a few items in terms of the ERS tool that's used in Illinois. And we came up with some proposals that are still just proposals at this point, but I think really interesting for conversation for folks to hear. So I'd like to, if you can share specifically what those proposals are, and then sort of outline a little bit the process that the subcommittee took in considering those items.
Oh, sure, Denise. And before I start, I think this conversation really hangs together nicely because we are also in Illinois trying to follow a similar path to what Donna has accomplished. So I think that that's helpful to us. But in answer to your question, so the recommendations, I'm going to mention 3 specific things and 1 general. The 3 specific are the items in ERS scales around block play, children's display, and dramatic play. Those 3 items were problematic for Montessori. And as I said, whether we're using this for cut scores or whether we're using it for baseline data for program improvement, we surely don't want to give Montessori programs baseline information that there's something wrong with their block play or there's something wrong with their children's display when Montessori best practice has a different approach. So we decided that in providing assessments, we would provide assessments, or at least that's the hope, as baseline data. But for whatever use, that we would mark the block play and children's display items as not applicable. The dramatic play, we had an interesting conversation about dramatic play and decided that if we were to provide assessors with a list of the Montessori practical life activities, they can count toward the dramatic play item. So those are my 3 specifics, and I'll in a minute I'll ask Denise if I got anything wrong there. And then the general point is, or a general consideration is that if we continue to use cut scores, that we want to keep them low enough so that programs have flexibility to ignore some of them and still do well. So these instruments are all imperfect, and we really don't want to straitjacket programs into, into doing things in one way. But most of the instruments we use are mostly very good. And so we didn't want to totally give that up either. We want programs to be doing most of the things that ERS or other instruments call for. So we want to make it clear throughout the system that Montessori programs and others could choose to intentionally skip some of those ERS items. Hopefully they don't have to choose that for block play, children's display, and dramatic play, because we've come up with a fix. Denise, did I say anything wrong there?
Not to my knowledge. I'm admittedly not an expert on the ERS tool or on Montessori classrooms. I'm not a Montessori teacher, even though I have lived that experience as a child. But one thing I'll say is that there was a really extensive conversation about blocks, which in retrospect, maybe we should have recorded, because it was really, it was a gripping conversation about blocks. But I feel like one of the great things about the blocks NA decision was that we were able to not ask the ERS tool and its intention, or the Montessori classroom materials that sort of look like blocks, to have to sort of compromise either of their intentions for the classroom to score well. We did talk around many different options of the way the blocks are positioned in the classrooms, what other materials are near them, what's the real intention of the ERS, and the really in-depth knowledge of the folks on the call helped us come to the conclusion that we didn't want to short either of those things we do think were really important. If I'm saying something wrong, please stop me, Tom. But something really important that I think you said is that most instruments are really good instruments. And I have to say, representing Montessori classrooms, that most of those instruments, most of the items, really almost all of the items, work really, really well with Montessori classrooms and do show the quality. And even, I think that this is a very surfacey explanation from Tom and I, but it's really just the tip of the iceberg of the way this will work. I'm not going to get the title correct, but that the person who's in charge of our quality consultants and quality assessments through Accelerate is going to be working with me to coordinate training for Montessori schools that will qualify for these NAs, to make sure that other aspects of those items are met in other ways in our classrooms. They're not just being given an NA across the board. Is that correct, Tom?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So I do have, though, a follow-up question for you on this. So the committee specified which schools would be able to qualify for these supports. And those are all American Montessori Society accredited and Association Montessori International recognized schools, which are two national accrediting organizations that Illinois has historically recognized. And so those are why they're easy to pick, because they're well known by the state. I know there are other national accreditors. And also those schools which have reached a specific place on the American Montessori Society's pathway to continuous school improvement, which is sort of like a Montessori QIS in itself. And I'd like if you could share a little bit about those conversations. I feel that that was very important to the group.
Yeah, Denise, thanks. So, I was concerned, I think we were all concerned at the beginning about, well, what is a Montessori school? Who is it that we're making exceptions for? And, just because you call yourself Montessori doesn't mean we want to give you a bunch of exceptions. How can you show that you're actually implementing Montessori best practice? And accredited programs were no problem for us because we recognized that. But there are many programs in Montessori that haven't achieved accreditation yet, but are quite good and working, probably are working toward accreditation. So thank you, MPPI, for bringing to our attention the AMS, American Montessori Society Pathway to Continuous School Improvement, which is a pretty rigorous set of steps. And this is step 6. I think accreditation is what, maybe 8. Step 6 means that the structural pieces are pretty much in place. You've got bachelor degree teachers, you've got qualified, you know, your materials, your classroom, the structural things are pretty much in place. And so we thought, well, okay, the staff is well trained. There's other evidence that they're putting a lot of work into implementing Montessori best practice. And so for those programs, we want to help and we want to make these exceptions so they can continue that work.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Tom. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
So my last question is for you, Rachel. And I'm going to share a couple things about Rachel as well. In her role, she is responsible for policy development and statewide implementation of Early Achievers, Washington's QRIS. Rachel's been in the field of early learning for over 20 years, and she has served in several roles from provider to coach to system partner. Rachel is a collaborative leader who's driven to advance racial equity by learning from the richly diverse communities in her state and continuing to examine and modify the state's quality system. Rachel, as you know, and as you've mentioned, Montessori advocacy leaders have been engaged in conversations with the state as changes have come through the Early Achievers program. And one thing that has been implemented that will greatly help Montessori schools participate is that Washington will now accept Montessori as an approved curriculum. Can you share the details around that approval, and the process that led to the addition to Montessori as an approved curriculum?
Absolutely. I think that this is a great change that has come into place. And I think it goes along with the work smarter, not harder, folks. Like if we could all do that, life would be a lot easier. So as I mentioned before, we've been engaged with the Pacific Northwest Montessori Association and our state agency for quite some time, and which has been a really important, I think, just journey to understand what Montessori is, what does the association do, how are they supporting providers. And parallel to that, our state engaged in a standards alignment process. So a few years back, we had a piece of legislation that passed that said, hey, state agency, you need to take your childcare licensing standards, your quality recognition improvement system standards, and your state funded pre-K standards, and you need to align them because we're asking too much of providers. And Montessori, the Montessori Association was a big part of that conversation as well. And from that, we learned about this validation process or verification process the Pacific Northwest Montessori Association was doing with Montessori providers in Washington State. As we know, Montessori as a word, it has a deep meaning. Providers, like, it's not trademarked though. So anybody can say, hey, I'm Rachel and I'm a Montessori provider. I operate, Apple Montessori on the corner of, 5th and Jackson here. But that doesn't mean that I'm really truly implementing Montessori. And so having that process where Pacific Northwest Montessori Association was engaging with Montessori providers and going out and validating that, yes, in fact, you are truly a Montessori provider, allowed us to have some different kinds of conversations as a state agency around what is it to be a Montessori provider and what might we be able to do within our licensing standards is where it started. And so we had conversations around group size, because that's something that is important in Montessori philosophy, mixed ages, the larger group size. And so that was a place where our childcare licensing standards were able to accommodate a variance of the licensing rule because we had this process whereby Pacific Northwest Montessori Association was validating that, yes, in fact, these sites are providing Montessori education. It is truly a Montessori school. Well, fast forward a little bit, because this groundwork had been laid, we were able to look at that and say, how might we use this information within our quality recognition and improvement system as we are revising our standards? And one of our standards in early achievers is that sites use either an evidence-based curricula or a curricula that is aligned with our Washington State Early Learning and Development Guidelines. Well, if you're using an evidence-based curriculum that's already a part of our list, you get the credit for it. You show us that what the curriculum is that you're using. We're like, yep, awesome. That's great. We're going to give you the credit for that. If you're not using one of those curricula, then we ask you to complete this curriculum alignment tool where you're going through and you're analyzing, what it is that you're implementing. So if you've got, maybe you're layering curricula, or maybe you've got your own provider designed. But we were hearing from Montessori providers like, hey, we are delivering this really rich curriculum. And is there a better way that we can document this rather than having all of us have to complete this curriculum alignment tool? And so Pacific Northwest Montessori Association came to DCYF, Department of Children, Youth, and Families, and said, is there a way we can explore, the validation process as a way to demonstrate that these sites are truly implementing Montessori, and can we acknowledge that in the quality recognition process and give credit for curriculum? And we're like, absolutely, yes. This is one of those places where let's work smarter, not harder. The data is already being collected and verified in some way. And so sites in Washington State, Montessori sites that either are, if they are AMS or AMI accredited, they get the accreditation points, plus they get the curriculum points. If they're not nationally accredited, but they have gone through that validation process with Pacific Northwest Montessori Association, they show us their certificate that they are in fact validated through that process, and we grant them the credit for their Montessori curricula as being aligned with our Washington State curriculum and development, or our Washington State Early Learning and Development Guidelines. So it's been a great win for us. And I think a great win for Montessori providers in our state.
Thanks so much, Rachel. I'm going to go off schedule and ask a question that someone put in the chat. And the question is, what does Pacific Northwest Montessori Association, look for to verify this, and how do they share the info with you?
Boy, I tell you, I am not equipped to answer that question right this minute. And I know that we've got somebody here that may be able to answer that question. I don't know if Hillary is able to answer that, but we have talked about this process with them. So we do have that information. I'm happy to share that back out as a follow-up to the webinar about what criteria the Pacific Northwest Montessori Association uses in order to determine that. And then they have a certificate that programs receive that states, it's kind of like getting a license from your licensor, or a quality recognition or a quality rating certificate from your state agency that says, yes, in fact, this site has achieved this on this date, and this is valid through X period. And so that's how we know. We don't get something direct from Pacific Northwest Montessori Association. It is the provider that shares that with us if they want to pursue either a variance for their license, or if they want to have the credit for the curricula in our QRS.
Thanks, Rachel. And sorry, that was kind of a trick question. I don't think that, so Rachel's lead advocate from Washington State is here, but I don't think she can actually speak, but I think she's putting messages in the chat to share answering that question. But I can give a broad answer, and that's that you notice that Wendy put that bullet pointed list up when she was talking about sort of vital ingredients for Montessori programs. And it's the same kind of list of things that you would see in the AMS continuous pathway that Tom was talking about. In Illinois, I think there are 7 or 8 states that have these state validation programs, and all of those things are kind of looking for those same ingredients to make sure that that schools are implementing Montessori. And I think my colleague Viju also just popped in the chat an MPPI document called the MPPI Montessori Essentials. And that's the same sort of list. I'm not sure if we're going to take another question from the chat. So while I'm sort of transitioning, I'll ask this question too. Tom talked a lot about the ERS tool in Illinois and the conversations that we've had. And I know, Donna, that there is a pilot project going on in Michigan. And I know it's not specifically about Montessori, but I'm hoping maybe you can tell us a little bit about your transitioning to the tools that you're going to give schools the choice of, I think, and you can fill in and what you're doing with that pilot program. We'd love to hear.
Yeah, Denise, so we piloted actually the class and we use that in some Montessori schools. We are kind of piloting ERS as we're using it to practice for our assessors to get reliable in the tool. So in our transition, which I said earlier today takes place next week, we'll be offering those two tools. So programs will be able to select whether or not they want to have the class assessment or the environment rating scales, the third editions in their programs. So it helps programs to have more choice so they can see what tool fits best for their program.
Yeah, love that. And I know that we have a bunch of Montessori schools participating in that pilot. So we're excited to see the outcomes. Then I'm going to ask Tom and Rachel a question. So both of your states have been looking at where Montessori credentials should fit in the workforce registry. And I feel like Rachel, Washington has updated the Montessori credential in the merit registry. And I'd like you to share how that was updated. And then Tom, I'd like you to sort of talk a little bit about the conversations because we haven't really landed on anything specific in terms of the registry, but we're just sort of having a lot of conversations. So Rachel, if you want to start out, that would be great.
Sure. And specific to QRIS, I think this is where this is really exciting. There has been a lot of work over the past couple of years looking at Montessori credentials and figuring out how do we match this up. And one of the great successes, again, through conversations with the Pacific Northwest Montessori Association and being able to describe like what it is that is happening and encourage the state to take a deeper look at what credentials are and being able to advocate for what you believe. We were able to take the Montessori credentials. So now if a provider say they have a BA degree in biology, but they also have a Montessori credential, they're going to get credit for having a BA in ECE within our QRIS. And so they'll get the credit for having that early childhood education degree, which is a huge win because then providers aren't losing points and we're not leaving education on the table. So that's been a great win for us. I do have more specifics related to how it matches up within our workforce registry. So let me pull that up really quickly because this is not my forte of area. So I want to make sure I'm stating things correctly. Okay, so DCYF conducted program reviews of various Montessori credentials to ensure that they aligned with the requirements to meet staff qualifications. That was a big piece. The review included ensuring that any credential met the following. So the course content, they must have the hours and the content that was equivalent to the Washington State Early Childhood Education stackable certificates. That course content aligned with the Washington State core competencies for early care and education professionals. And that meets DCYF accreditation requirements. So that's our Department of Children, Youth, and Families requirements for higher education institutions, regionally accredited and recognized by the United States Department of Education. Their certificate or credential program must be accredited through a nationally recognized accrediting bodies, such as MACT accreditation for Montessori. And then based on those reviews, we recognize the following Montessori credentials as equivalents to our Washington State Early Childhood Education State Certificate, which there's several. So there's the Montessori Accreditation Council for Teacher Education, so MACT accredited, teacher credential for infant and toddler, the MACT accredited teacher credential in ECE, Association Montessori International Diploma in Assistance to Infancy, birth to 3, Association Montessori International Diploma in Primary, ages 3 to 6. The American Montessori Society Diploma Infant and Toddler. American Montessori Society Diploma Early Childhood, so it's ages 2.5 to 6, and the Montessori Elementary 1. So all of those were recognized as non-ECE related degrees as equivalents to an AA in ECE. We do not at this time accept any additional Montessori credentials, including the recently created Montessori Administrator credential. So it was determined that that certificate is not currently aligned with the Washington State ECE state certificate as a true equivalent, but it's quite a few other things that have been recognized.
Thanks so much, Rachel.
That was a lot of technical info.
That was a lot of details. That's okay. I'm sure everyone got them down. And then Tom, if you just want to share, and it doesn't have to be in detail, but what is being talked about in Illinois and what has been posed and considered. How does that sound?
That sounds great. And I think we're talking about what Rachel described, so that's a good thing. So yeah, the problem in aligning our workforce registry is that the workforce registry is a somewhat different, closely related, but different system. And developing it involves a lot of people from higher education. And so there are principles and rules and like that. And so college credits are extremely important in that system. And which raises an unrelated but important question of how can people in our field who are working full time and like that get college credits in any kind of time frame that would work for them? And so we were talking a lot about job embedded professional development carrying college credit and like that. But I digress. So I say all that to say changing that system is taking a little longer than we had hoped. And we've had conversations, we continue to do that. So the ideal solution, I think, that we believe is to fix the gateway system. That's our registry system, to fix that system so that Montessori credentials are in the right place. We do have a workaround in case that takes too long. I mean, we don't have it, but we're working on a workaround, which is that for purposes of recognition in our QRIS system, we could separately recognize, alternative credentials, and that would include the Montessori. So we are impressed that Montessori training is rigorous and effective, and so we'd like to really make that happen.
Terrific. Thank you, Tom. That was an excellent short description of something really complicated and confusing. So we're sort of going to transition now. And while we do that, I just want to express my gratitude to the three of you and to Debbie Mathias and Build for the collaborative partnerships that we enjoy and that enable us to move towards our vision of Montessori being an option for every family. I know we didn't touch on every area of the paper today, but our MPPI staff contacts will come up, and we're happy to support work in your states as well as our state advocacy leads, as we know are also on the call, and to help you incorporate Montessori quality within your state system. I think we'll go to some questions in the chat question and answer section, and so I'm going to welcome everyone back, and I actually have one ready while you do your popping in. And so I don't, whoever wants to answer this can answer it, but I'm curious from the chat if any of you can speak on how ongoing monitoring will be completed from the QIS in your state for Montessori programs, or how that would be handled. Hopefully I phrased that properly.
Do you mean in terms of?
Go ahead, Rachel.
Is the question, I'm taking the question in the frame of QRIS. That's the approach that I'm going to go for, given the audience. In our state, we have dramatically revised our total approach to our quality recognition system. And so instead of a one size, fits all kind of one observation every 3 years, our process, and I think, Tom, you talked about this too, is like aligning with kind of a CQI cycle. And so we have an iterative process, and instead of using the ERS in class any longer, we have actually developed a tool in Washington State called the Quick Tool. It's quality interactions in childcare, which is used to evaluate videos that providers submit. Providers select which standards it is that they are showcasing in these videos. They submit the videos, and then we use the Quick Tool in order to provide feedback on practice. And this has been so far, I mean, we're in the early adopters phase of this practice and working on validating this tool, but so far it has been very popularly accepted by providers in feeling that it is a way for them to demonstrate their quality regardless of what model they're using. So if they're a Montessori provider, they're a Waldorf provider, they're, monolingual Spanish speaking provider, that they have a way to demonstrate their quality that they didn't feel they had before. That's just one element of our new system that I think is kind of opening the door to different program models. We're also using a 360 interview process to kick off our quality recognition. That's the first step. Then the video is the second step. And then the opportunity to submit additional evidence through records review is kind of the third phase. So we've got some multiple pathways for people to submit evidence in a much more flexible manner. And they're getting that feedback all along the way and working with their coach, and they're earning points along the way too. And then they're in charge of when they say, I've earned enough points, and this is the quality level that I feel comfortable with for my program, and they finalize that. So really trying to put the power in the hands of the providers and being as transparent as possible.
You're on mute,
muted,
Denise.
It always has to happen at least once. There's snow plows here, and so I keep turning myself off. Thank you so much, Rachel. That is super interesting. Tom, you were going to say something.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say that the emphasis in our monitoring, I hope, in our proposed system, will be on culture of improvement. We really want to know, what are you doing weekly and monthly to improve? So the continuous improvement. And I think Montessori schools should be doing weekly and monthly things to improve just like everyone else. And I encourage that AMS has their pathway to continuous improvement. So I think it's going to look pretty similar at Montessori to any other program.
And I definitely agree with Tom. So quality improvements should be ongoing. And so our programs should be working on quality every day, because quality needs to happen every day. So our programs are continuously supported from our 10 resource centers that we have throughout the state, who provide technical assistance and coaching for programs to help them on anything that they have in their quality improvement plan. And it's ongoing throughout the year. So I'm assuming that's what the person meant when they said monitoring.
Yes, thank you so much, Donna. And thank you to all three of you for answering that one. I'm going to open it up because I don't have the bandwidth to read the Q&A as we go, and hope that Debbie or Wendy are going to share a question with you all. But I have to say, this conversation has been so wonderful. I feel like everyone has really gotten a little view into both what it's like at your state's QRS and also what conversations you've had with Montessori programs. So I've been thrilled to be a part of it.
There was a question that I answered in the Q&A, but I think it's an important one to bring up before the whole group. Someone asked if Montessori advocates have found success working with advocates of other program types and settings, such as family child care, to broaden how state QIS take into account all types of programs. And yes, we're constantly encouraging our folks to make connections. We have some really nice reciprocal relationships in a few states where we support, legislation or policy requests that another group is doing, and they support ours. So yes, we're much stronger with a larger voice, and we all are working towards serving children and families well. So yes, in fact, I would highly encourage our Montessori folks on here and our non-Montessori folks on here to connect with one another and see what we can do for children.
One question that I'm looking at in the box here is there a potential for funding programs toward Montessori accreditation and staff continuing education? I think that's a state by state question. Each state does that slightly differently, but I do know that a number of states do allow their grants and awards to be spent toward accreditation, whether it's home-based accreditation, Montessori accreditation, NAYC, or other types of accreditations. Sometimes there's an approved list of accreditations. You know, this might be another area where Montessori would say, could we be on the list to receive funding toward accreditation like other projects are, you know? So that's a state by state question. And I think the continuing education would be the same type of thing. I saw another question in the chat about state PDG grantees able to partner with Montessori. Again, I think that's a policy decision made at each state level. So there's advocacy work there to be done. But when you think about Montessori as being an approach in schools and public schools, you know, I think that in terms of PDG, you would have a good, you know, baseline to go forward and have a good discussion about. It's already an approved school building, you know, in our district. How about pre-K allowing a Montessori approach? So again, a state by state discussion, developing those relationships, right? Bringing forward some of the information in the document, the memo we just wrote might help you get there. And you've got a lot of great people, and Denise and Wendy and partners across the country to talk to about that. But Tom, what were you going to say? How you were coming back on something, building on something that Wendy was saying, right?
No, I think I said it.
Okay. All right. The recording will be shared and posted, everyone. So you'll have this, we'll send it to everybody that participated or signed up today. The link to the posting of the webinar. Give us a day to do it and get the associated materials up there. Well, can we conclude with just a final word and begin with our state partners? Tom, why don't you kick us off with just what's our final word here on consideration of this topic?
My final word is, isn't it interesting that Denise and Wendy have brought together 3 states that are all working in the same direction and coming up with some of the same conclusions? Denise, when I started in this job some almost 6 years ago, Denise brought me this long list of Montessori issues. And I thought, oh my goodness, what am I ever going to do with this list? And they're finally shaking out. And I think between our 3 states, we're getting some answers.
Donna, what would you say in conclusion to our participants?
So Deb, I just wanted to piggyback a little bit on what Wendy said and how important it is to build those relationships. So having those relationships with Montessori and the states, and that states build relationships with not just Montessori, but other program types so that they can begin to understand, because, you know, it's all about knowledge and understanding and being able to support all programs and all program types. So the more conversations you have, the better the understanding is, and the easier it is to make change.
Thanks, Donna. That's great. Rachel?
Yeah, excuse me. Collaboration is key. So building those partnerships, having those conversations, as Donna said, So important. And, you know, the times that we have seen the greatest impact on our early learning system is when providers and advocates have come together and built coalitions around shared visions for what they want for their children and their communities. And we have seen transformative things happen in our state based on that. So I can't stress that the importance of those relationships and collaboration.
Now let's turn to our MPVI folks. Denise, what do you like to say in conclusion?
Thanks, Debbie. I feel like I might actually be echoing a little bit what Rachel just said, but I can't stress how important these relationships are. Like when Tom's talking about when we met 6 years ago, and I think about what that was like when we barely knew each other and I barely had my list organized clearly, and how it's developed over this time into really a partnership. And I think that, you know, when I see Tom on a call or on a committee, I don't think, oh, Tom's going to vote for everything having to do with Montessori. I think Tom's really going to listen, and we can really work together. And I think that is what we need. And that's what these three folks represent in these 3 states. And there are many more, but I think there's still an opportunity for growth. So these conversations and these relationships are what I'll leave you with.
Wendy?
Yeah, I think I just want to offer thanks to all of you who are working in quality improvement in your states. I know it's a hard job. We know from conversations at events like the Build Conference and our conversations with policymakers like our panelists that you have a deep commitment to making sure that the system is working for children and families. And so I just want to thank you for that, and thank you for your openness to working with Montessori programs, family child care providers, Indigenous Montessori, Indigenous early learning programs, and a whole host of others who may have unique needs, and really creating that breadth. Thank you so much for all you do.
Well, in conclusion, I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing their ideas, expertise, experiences, and ways they've figured out how to be flexible and enlarge the quality improvement work in their state. I'd like to just say to our participants, when you close out of the session, an evaluation will pop up, and please take a moment to complete this evaluation, as your feedback really informs our work and helps us improve. Gosh, I'd like to thank all of our participants as you leave for coming to the session today, sharing your ideas, comments, and questions, your engagement and feedback through the chat box, and your excitement about the topic was certainly felt by all of us on the session today, and look forward to seeing you at a future session. And thank you so much for coming.